Welcome to the latest Eversheds Sutherland Legal Insights podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Hot Takes, the companion podcast to our series of interviews with leaders and luminaries from the financial services industry, exploring trends and opportunities in global financial markets in 2025. I am joined today by my colleagues Ginger Faulk, who leads our U.S. and global sanctions practices, and James Lindop, our global co-chair of competition trade and foreign investment. I'm your host, Sierra Nicholson, global strategy and development lead for the financial services sector. Ginger and James, welcome. Thank you both for being here. We've just listened to our colleague Matthew Allen in conversation with Nicola Watkinson, who's the managing director international of the Citi UK, about the current state of international trade. I'm really excited to hear your hot takes. So Ginger, I'm going to come to you first. I was really interested in Nicola's comments about the tensions between the three major regional trading blocs, being Europe, the US, and China, and how those tensions are driven by economic agendas. You know, she sort of laid out that Europe is taking a protectionist stance, the US is trying to bring production back into country, and then China, very much in growth mode, trying to further develop domestic giants. So I know that you serve many global and multinational clients, and of course, your team has been following all of this very closely. I'm curious to hear from you. Does Nicola's comment about companies struggling to find a way to be friends with all three, Europe, the US, and China, resonate with what you're hearing in conversations with your clients?
Yes, and indeed, multinationals are finding today's regulatory and trading environment to be a very challenging one. And to make matters worse, trade protectionism would appear to be on the rise worldwide at present in the current year. The increasing complexity and variability of regulations, coupled with the unpredictability of new tariffs announced from the U.S. and its trading partners, contribute to this landscape where businesses have to constantly adapt to new rules and prepare for potential disruption. To focus on the United States in particular, the U.S. has seen an expansion of trade protectionism under the last two presidential administrations. For example, the CHIPS and Science Act, passed in 2022, aims to reduce dependence on foreign suppliers and revitalize domestic semiconductor production. Additionally, the Inflation Reduction Act involved massive investments in U.S. clean energy technologies, which further emphasized the focus on building U.S. domestic production. So these measures indicate a clear shift towards protecting and promoting U.S. industries. So American protectionism was already reshaping the world economy. It's expected to continue rising in 2025, with both major political parties now supporting policies that prioritize domestic industries. And that was even before the recent round of tariffs, the most significant of which was a recent tariff action taken by the Trump administration to impose or reimpose 25% tariffs on U.S. imports of steel and aluminum from all countries. These tariffs were actually first imposed under the Biden administration and now have been reissued in a stronger form. And the countries previously exempted from the tariffs, which were Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Japan, Mexico, South Korea, the EU, Ukraine, and the UK, now will no longer have exemptions. And also the new Trump tariffs increased the tariffs on aluminum imports from 10% to 25%. And that's not even to mention the on-again, off-again tariffs that President Trump has put on Canada and Mexico imports. If those come into effect, we're looking at that. Those would include tariffs on Canadian energy imports and also tariffs on Mexican produce, which in particular will hit American consumer grocery budgets. And finally, the so-called reciprocal tariffs introduced by the Trump administration in February instructs the administration to review quote unquote non-reciprocal trade relationships with U.S. trading partners. And to consider imposing additional tariffs or other trade barriers. it is not yet known what form of reciprocal treatment the U.S. will adopt, and whether those tariff levels will mirror the other country on a product by product basis, or if they will be imposed on a countrywide volume basis. But overall, these types of developments are contributing to market volatility, and the mixed signals coming out of Washington make it challenging for multinational companies to make the decisions needed to insulate themselves. And this can cause delays, it can increase cost for projects, and just contributes overall to a more unpredictable and uncertain U.S. investment environment.
Ginger, that's really insightful. I mean, especially, I think you were really hitting on some of the other themes that Nicola touched on as well around that unpredictability and that just all the change that's happening. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, and you made some comments about this, but the current trend of regulatory fragmentation and how that's going to continue to make the cost of compliance and the cost of doing business globally ever higher and more complex. I wonder if you can share how you're seeing some global and multinational companies navigate that particular challenge.
Certainly. The regulatory fragmentation creates a lot of uncertainty, as I said, for businesses. And to make it worse, some of these measures that are aimed at protecting domestic industries lead to retaliation from other countries, which further complicates the international business environment. So you're right, companies are forced to navigate an increasingly complex and unpredictable landscape, and this makes long-term planning and investment decisions exceptionally challenging. The trend of regulatory fragmentation in particular is making the cost of compliance and the cost of doing business globally higher and more complicated. Companies face a myriad of trade and other regulations across different geographies, and each with its own set of requirements, which increases the administrative burden and compliance costs for companies and forces them to invest in compliance programs that may be specific to a particular jurisdiction or geography, or maybe specific to their sector or their products. So the real question then is, how can global companies navigate these challenges? And there are various strategies for doing so. Principally, the principal strategy would involve diversifying supplier base to reduce dependency on any single region. And also companies may invest in technology to enhance their supply chain visibility and collaborate more and engage more with their supply chain to achieve greater transparency and stability in the supply chain. To be sure, the companies that proactively build resiliency and diversity into their supply chains and prepare for tariffs and disruptions by reviewing their supply chain and customer contracts will be better suited to navigate this complex regulatory landscape and weather this era of uncertainty.
So another thing that Nicola touches on is how the current trend of regulatory fragmentation is and will continue to make the cost of compliance and, frankly, the cost of doing business globally ever higher and more complex. James, how are you seeing your clients navigate this challenge?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more from that. The regulatory divergence is certainly an issue, which it's increasingly imperative for business to accept and lean into. I guess the one point I would pick up, and again, I don't disagree with it at all from what Nicola said, and giving different reasons for different regional approaches, is the economic agenda, or is it protectionism or national security? Even as a subset of protectionism, I would argue that actually it is all associated with protectionism. And I've had this debate with a number of my partners recently, and as we're revising on different areas of law. And actually, I think you can make the case that a lot of what we're seeing from a regulatory divergence perspective is under the guise of protectionism. And as countries and regions develop their own regulatory frameworks, businesses have to navigate these one way or another, and the knock-on effect of the constant influx of new regulations requires businesses to continuously update their compliance processes, which are both time consuming and costly. And as a result, the need for specialized compliance teams and systems to manage those changes adds to that financial burden. And what we're seeing is increasingly this regional variation in regulatory requirements. So you can describe it as divergence, and in some cases, we're seeing actual bifurcation, completely different approaches to things, which is making it very challenging for businesses to maintain compliance. Different regions have distinct rules for different areas, such as foreign investment, financial crime compliance, data protection, and environmental standards, etc. Navigating these different regimes across different regions, different jurisdictions requires businesses to invest in local expertise and tailor their compliance strategies to each market, frankly. And this fragmentation not only increases costs, but also arguably creates operational inefficiencies, and companies have to adapt their processes to meet these diverse regulatory standards. Again, another issue that we're coming up, clients are asking for advice on, are directly as a result of resource constraints, which exacerbate the challenges posed by the changes in these regulatory frameworks. Often limited budgets and the difficulty in hiring skilled compliance professionals mean that clients and businesses are struggling to expand their compliance teams to deal with the growing demand. And often one way to deal with that is to outsource their compliance function, which can be effective, but it does add another layer of complexity. And additionally, the rapid pace of digital transformation exposes businesses to higher risks, particularly through the use of digital payments and cryptocurrencies. So compliance processes must adapt to these new technologies, which again requires significant investment in advanced systems and training. So there's no question the global compliance landscape is becoming increasingly complex, arguably diverting management attention and resources from what otherwise might be considered the strategic goals of businesses. Companies that operate internationally face unprecedented challenges due to these varying regulations. And if they're not adequately addressed, risk undermining confidence and hindering growth within those businesses. So to maintain pace, businesses are needing to continuously adapt their strategies to invest in technology and possibly outsource certain functions to deal with any gaps in compliance. I should also just make the point that regulatory technology does offer some solution with AI, etc., helping institutions stay ahead of evolving regulation. However, even implementing these technologies requires substantial investment and expertise.
Yeah, James, it's really interesting. It's a complex situation, and all of the solutions seem to make it further complex, right? So a lot for folks to navigate. Yeah. One last question for you, and I'm really interested in your perspective on this, James, because of your extensive transactional experience. One of the bright spots that Nicola points to in the current environment is this opportunity for financial services firms, whether from the UK or other neutral quote unquote markets, to bring their expertise into the deal landscape of what she identified as these really growth corridors of trade. So Saudi Arabia to China, the Gulf to India, India to Africa, and the role being to facilitate transactions and also to fill what could be described as a trust deficit between some of those trading partners. What's your perspective on that? Do you think that has legs?
Yes, I do think there's opportunity, and increasingly there's the perhaps what we're seeing is the tit for tat trade type wars, which are in the news daily currently, are perhaps increasing that level of opportunity. The regions you mentioned are experiencing significant economic growth and increasing trade flows, which creates a demand, one would assume, for reliable financial partners. And UK financial institutions, unequivocally, they have a long-standing reputation for expertise, regulatory compliance, trustworthiness, and therefore surely they are well positioned to bridge any apparent trust deficit that may exist between trading partners. The deep knowledge of those businesses, those institutions, and experience in managing complex financial transactions can, one would think, help streamline processes and build confidence among the relevant stakeholders. The global economic landscape, though, it is becoming more interconnected, unquestionably, with significant growth in intra-Asia trade and trade flows between Asia, Middle East, and Asia and Africa. And I do think that this presents new opportunities for businesses in general, but specifically, in answer to your question, for financial services firms to support and facilitate these emerging trade routes. And historically, UK institutions are adept at navigating complex regimes, increasingly so, as we were just discussing, and leveraging their expertise to manage the regulatory requirements across the different regions as they evolve. I suppose the one other point is that also the UK institutions have strong capital reserves, which enable them to finance large-scale projects and investments, which further boost economic integration and development in those growth corridors, which all sounds very positive. I guess the challenges that will need to be considered, as we know, are the daily issues we're experiencing in terms of geopolitical concerns and risks, depending on which government may be in power in whichever jurisdiction at any given moment. The high cost of compliance that we were discussing is a real, genuine issue that has to be dealt with. But despite these challenges, the sort of combination of expertise, adaptability, as I mentioned, and innovation, technological innovation by UK financial services firms, are well placed to capitalize on these emerging opportunities.
Thank you for listening to the Eversheds Sutherland Legal Insights podcast.